welcome to the Group Coach How to Be Effective session. It's really a session that kind of encompasses group coaching as we see it and as we do it. And it's really about how to be effective at that role or in that role. The role is going to be described in this session as we do it, but there are other ways to do it. And as we go through, I'll share some of those. So it's really depends on your situation and the people that you would be servicing as a group coach as to what really makes the most sense. So ask questions as we go. The role of Barnabas Ministries and the coaching piece, what is it that we're really trying to do? Well, first of all, the ministry is not something that dictates behaviors. So for instance, within a group, we ask people to do the 4 elements. We ask, we don't tell you you must, because if you don't, you're kicked out. We basically dictate, we don't mandate. We try to share and then influence behaviors because we've seen that demonstrating the use of the 4 elements in a group, that's the prayer and the scripture and the updating and the storytelling. By doing that, the groups actually grow closer together. They stay together longer. Their experiences are richer and deeper. So we kind of try to do this through influence. And as a coach, that's kind of the thing that we're asking you to do, is not to dictate, not to mandate, but just share our best practices and participate in that as we work to support people who are facilitating our groups. So fairly simple overall objective. So this session is scheduled for an hour. We probably won't take the full hour. But during this time, we're going to talk about the purpose of coaching, what good looks like. You know, what do we actually do? What are responsibilities or duties? You know, how do you prepare to coach? And then, of course, how do you coach? And what's that look like? So there's really those pieces that we're going to talk about. Is there anything else that you would want us to cover during this session?
That sounds pretty comprehensive to me, Dave.
Okay, all right. We'll start with this and just ask questions as we go. So why coach? First of all, we have groups and groups have facilitators. So the facilitator has other group members so they can get prayed for that way. So really it begs the question, why do you need a coach? If the facilitator as a pastor is amongst their peers within the group and they get the support that way, what's the big deal? You know, what's the coach really for? And we found that within the group context, you share some of the roles as you're facilitating, but you still have a responsibility, or some people might think of it as a burden as a facilitator, to organize, to make sure people are reminded to come. There's an administrative piece, and then there's sometimes conflict or things that don't go as well as they should within the group. There's dynamics and people, and so how do you handle those? And so those are things that you can't always talk about with your group members when you're trying to figure out how to solve them. So that's where a coach comes in, somebody for the facilitator to talk to and share some other practices with and try to brainstorm together. So, but the purpose of why we coach is because we want groups to be healthy. We want everybody to have spiritual and relational maturity in Christ together, sharing that unity. And when we think about healthy groups, that's what we mean by the term healthy. It's a group that gets together and people pray for each other. They care about each other. They come together because they care, not because they feel like they have to or because they committed, because they've gotten to know each other and they genuinely care for each other. So that's a picture of a healthy group. And groups go through different cycles. And we found that if a group is not communicated with on a frequent basis, you define frequent, but we say monthly, but say monthly. If somebody doesn't reach out, just make sure everything's going well and express an interest in them. A group can feel like they're disconnected from the ministry and on their own. And then if something happens, then they kind of go their own way and may stay together or may disband. But the reality is once they get disconnected, they don't feel as supported. So part of the reason why we coach is to make sure that the facilitator feels supported, not alone. So, I mean, if you think about it as a pastor of a church, who do you connect with to support you?
Mhm.
You know, a lot of times you're the top dog. You're the one who's at the top, and there is nobody to ask necessarily some of the hard questions. So we wanted to just provide that kind of a resource. So that's really why we coach, because we're really interested in spiritual and relational unity amongst the pastors that are in the group and maintaining that long term.
I think like what you're saying, so like my group has gone really well, but I still appreciate the check-ins and the support. And even by having that relationship, if I do have any issues or concerns, I already have that relationship that's established where I would immediately go to for support.
Yep, yep. I think a lot of times when we form a new group, at the time we form a group and we select, or I should say, the facilitator is selected, we need to offer that person coaching right away. Not that they need help. No, just offer them a relationship with someone who can be a coach.
Mhm.
So after a person has been in a group facilitating through the pilot period, many times it's a good idea for them to, another group starts in their area, for them to begin to coach somebody who is new to facilitating.
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be somebody who's been facilitating for decades. It can just be somebody who's facilitated for a year and
Yeah.
has some experience. And really it's the relationship that's important. So, and if you run across something that is difficult to handle and you both put your heads together and you're like, I'm not really sure. Well, then you reach out to the broader ministry, reach out to like Steve or somebody, and we'll brainstorm it with you. And you're not alone, never alone. So that's kind of why we coach. What does it look like? Good coach. From a values and behavior perspective, a good coach is somebody who just loves other pastors, really. I mean, we believe in unity. We're devoted to the church. We're committed to those in ministry. But we're also committed to confidentiality, because without that, the trust isn't there. And that also means that there has to be a demonstration of some humility amongst each other, some vulnerability, a willingness to pray for each other is one of the behaviors you'd see. So that's how we see a coach. We don't put a whole lot of characteristics around that. It's really just the behavior that Jesus would have us demonstrate with one another. So our values align with that. Qualities of coaching activity was really just an opportunity for you to think back about leaders that have supported you over the years. And if you were to think about one that made them, one good role model that you might have had in your past, can you think of one person?
Yeah, I can think of my mentor in seminary. And I think one thing that, I mean, he had a lot of wisdom and he had a lot of maturity, but then he also really cared about me and invested in me, and I was quite young at the time, but he was still very affirming and very supportive of me. And
Yeah.
He was very much a teacher, but we ended up then as a young pastor doing work together where we became colleagues.
Yeah.
And it was kind of neat to kind of work as a colleague, with my mentor, who had been my teacher.
So you mentioned that he seemed to care
He
about you.
did. He was a very caring, he's since gone on to the Lord, but he was a very caring person. And he definitely throughout his career supported a lot of people in ministry.
Right. And I think about it in terms of behavior. What did he do specifically that made you feel cared about?
One thing that he was very committed to and really taught me, he always affirmed what he could affirm. So he would always start with affirmations, but he was very genuine about it. It wasn't like he was, and then he would always start with affirmation. And then if he ever offered a correction, he was always very gentle in how he, offered correction. And so he would sort of say, affirm what you can affirm, but and then critique, but a gentle critique, and really be loving all throughout.
Right.
So he was kind of an easy person to receive feedback from, because he kind of led with the so he had a real kind of positive affirmation approach to
Oh,
giving feedback.
I love that. In the secular world, and because I worked for a large insurance company for many years, and we taught coaching. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I learned from that approach was what you're talking about is affirm what you can. And even when you're giving constructive feedback, and the words that we used, and everybody has different ones, but we would use, you could talk about what went well
Hmm.
and what could have been done differently.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that you did something wrong,
Right.
because there are different approaches sometimes.
Right. Right.
It's a methodology of just providing feedback and assistance and coaching that's not as critical.
And well, like you said, have you thought about doing this differently? I don't think that that's threatening to someone, or their self-esteem is going to kind of, there's worth and value is less likely to come into question.
Yep.
And you're, like you said, I think it fits the philosophy of the ministry,
Yeah.
of just, hey, here's something to think about, do with it as you will. But I think that makes people more likely to really kind of consider it.
Yeah. Because if you start off with, well, what you did wrong is,
Right, right,
right
right.
away it put people on the defensive. That's not affirming, which is what your coach, your mentor, was. He was affirming, so he didn't do that to you, which is great. I'll bet you he also maintained confidentiality.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was a long time pastor and then professor. So, he was a very ethical person.
Yeah, I'll bet you who's also a good listener.
Definitely a good listener.
Yeah, yeah.
And my greatest teachers always modeled humility.
Oh, very good.
Even though they accomplished a lot in their ministry and careers, were very learned, they were still very humble.
Yeah, it's funny when people say the word humble to me, I think of, all right, now how am I going to demonstrate that? And a lot of times it's as simple as just being willing to listen, just
Mm,
listen to understand, not to what I'm going to say next.
mhm. Right.
So that humility is really important, as a quality of a group coach. So, and I can tell by the way you're listening here that it's something that you value and share.
Mm.
So thank you for that. So then let's move on to the things that you actually do when you're a group coach. What are some of the things that you see? Well, if I start over on the right side, emphasize the four elements I mentioned of earlier. You want to be asking about occasionally from the facilitator, how is the storytelling going? Has everybody had a chance to do it? Or if you're talking about prayer, you say, has anything come up recently in the prayer that you do in your group? Or you might ask them what approach they found useful.
Mm.
There's just light inquiries into one or two or each of the four elements, as maybe not all at once, but on one call you might ask about one call you might ask about the updating, and if everybody has equal amount of time to update, just
Mm.
inquiries that get people thinking about the quality of their group experience, and if there's anything that maybe they could do to tweak it. You support more than one facilitator. You start off with maybe just one facilitator, but really great coaches sometimes support more than one.
Mhm.
No more than we found a max is 5. That's a lot of time, and most people can't do anywhere near that. But
Mhm.
between 1 and 5, somewhere in there, makes sense depending on your schedule.
Mhm.
You assist with group transitions. Now, when new people come into a group, we all know that they have to tell their story, but they also need to hear the stories of everybody else in the group so that they can get to know them. So it's just a reminder that we do that. But what if the facilitator is going to needs to bow out or change, and there's a change in transition? That might be something that you talk to them about the transition, ask them what they're expecting to do, or do they have somebody in mind for facilitation, and if not, work through that with them. If you have any troubles with that, or you're like, what do I say about this? Contact Steve, your team lead, and say, okay, how many transitions have you been through? How does this usually go? And you kind of just make sure that they have a resource so that the group can stay together.
Mhm.
Has your group ever had a transition with more people coming in?
So, we just have been like 1 year
Okay.
since we started, and we have 5 in our group, and everyone seems really stable in their ministries in this area, long-term ministries, and plugged into the group. So I'm not anticipating any imminent, I mean, obviously life happens, but we're not anticipating any transitions in our group.
Okay. And when it comes, then the issue is there. And that's where a coach could sometimes help you with ideas, things to think about to make the transition a little smoother.
Mhm.
So it's somebody to bounce ideas off of. So the coach is aligned with our vision. Our vision is spiritual and relational unity, so that the world will know that Jesus better. We do that through forming groups. So you're aligned with our vision. And then, of course, the last one at the bottom is connected with staff. And that's like I said, you're going to have somebody who you can reach out to. We found that good groups really enjoy meeting with each other. And if there's no communication from us to them or them to us, we lose touch. And we'd really like to support them. So it's just maintaining connection with us. No specific requirement for how many times or how often or whatever. It's just we need to maintain some level of communication. So they're general responsibilities and duties, but it's really focused on just making sure that the group has what it needs and that you are basically building a relationship with the facilitator so that he or she feels comfortable chatting with you, at whatever cadence makes sense. We recommend monthly, but whether that is monthly or if every other month or whatever it happens to your case and their case, you just make it happen at whatever, like I said, they desire and they need. All right, so how do you prepare for a coaching conversation? We're getting down to the nitty gritty now. What level of prep do you need? How many hours is it going to take? Did Steve clue you in on how many hours of prep you need? I'm teasing.
He did not. No.
I'm teasing. It does not take hours of prep. That's one of the beauties of this. It's really 5 to 15 minutes is really all it really takes, because what are you going to do? You're going to pray about the conversation you're going to have. You might review some prior notes. If there have been other conversations, you might want to catch up with, okay, now what was going on last time we talked? Because there may be something to follow up on. And then the only other thing that we usually do for prep is you might think, so what am I going to focus on this time? And of course, that may change when you get on the call with them, because they may have something that they need to focus on. That's great. But if they don't have something, then you might say, well, I'm going to ask an open-ended question. And you could have used one of the ones that I mentioned earlier, like, when was the last time everybody in your group told their stories? Like in your case, your group has been together for a year. Now, if I'm your coach, I might ask that question. And what I'm listening for is that it's been a year since everybody's told their story. And we tend to like to hear people tell their stories annually, because you'll go deeper as you do that. So that means the cadence for the group. Remember when we went through the pilot period, everybody told their story, and that took up most of the time for each of the period sessions. So annually, you want to stop and kind of do that again. And it's a real good way, because if I'm telling my story again, you're actually going to hear different things. I'll probably go deeper because now I trust you more. And it really ties the group together better, and it really serves to emphasize that spiritual and relational unity. It can be a really precious time. As you pray for each other, you still do the prayer and the updating. Again, there's smaller portions of the meeting when you retell your stories. But as a coach, I might ask that question to try to lead you in that direction, to say, have you considered when would be a good time to do that? And just talk about the benefits. So it'd be an example of an open-ended question I might focus on if you're right around the year mark. So, but again, not a lot of prep time. You can sit down, you can pray, think about it, look at your notes, and you're ready to talk. And then, of course, the coaching itself, we try to keep that simple too. There are 3 questions that we really think are most important. We found that if you ask these 3 questions, everything else kind of follows. So if I were coaching you, Dale, I'd say, so how are you today? How are you doing? And then I would want to listen because I'm there for you and I'm trying to develop a relationship with you. So it'd be about me doing a lot more listening, maybe taking a note or two so I'll remember, and I'll then know what to pray for. But then I focus, instead of just on you, then I focus on your groups. How's your group doing? And if you get a one-word answer like, great, fine, okay, then that probably means that you need a follow-up question, which is, tell me what fine looks like.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, and just try to get them to talk a little bit about their group. And then, how can I pray with you? Because you're on the phone with them, if that's the method of your communication. And so you want to pray with them in person at that time versus say, how can I pray for you? I'll make a note and I'll pray for you later. That has a different feel than I'm going to pray with you right now.
Yeah.
So how long do these calls take? What do you think with those 3 questions and maybe a few follow-ups?
Well, I feel really close in my personal relationship with my coach.
Okay.
And so we tend to do hour-long phone calls, but
Okay.
I think it's because we both really enjoy it and enjoy
Yeah.
the fellowship. I'm sure it wouldn't have to be, I don't know, would 15 to 30 minutes or something be more typical?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you start with somebody and you don't really know them that well, you're probably going to start with a 10 or 15-minute call.
Yeah.
You've got 3 questions you can get through. You're trying to make sure that they know that you care and that they know that you are going to pray for them. You care about them and their ministry, their life, their group, and you just want to be a resource for them. Now, as you get to know them better, the calls I've had with coaches for my groups, yeah, hour is easy. I mean, once you really get to know the person, you want to spend the time with them.
Yeah, I mean, we're fellowshipping, we're sharing life with each other, we're sharing ministry with each other.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be that long, but but he always asks, to pray with me, and we always end with a good prayer time. So I really enjoy the conversations with my coach. I'm very blessed by the conversations with my coach in the fellowship.
Wonderful. That's great. So that's really what we do when we coach. It's trying to really develop a relationship. And if you think about relationship building 101, these questions would actually work really well for almost anybody.
Yeah.
How are you doing? How's your family doing? And then, how can I pray with you? That's how you build relationships. And really, that's what it is. Coaching is a relationship. There's no way around that. So there's a resource that we have that kind of covers all the stuff that we've just talked about. It's called the Group Coach Guide. And curiosity, because of the way we set this up, this is more of a custom session. You probably didn't get a copy of it as this process unfolded.
I did not yet. I had gotten, of course, the facilitators guide, and I found that a very helpful resource. So because of that positive experience, I'm looking forward, to this resource as well.
So I'll send this to you, but to give you an idea what's in it, it talks about the purpose of what we do, which is what we just covered, and the duties, the qualifications, the how-to, all of that's in there, along with a couple of other resources that you may find helpful. But rather than having one of these sessions where we expect somebody to take a lot of notes and remember every word, that's not realistic. So we provide a group coach guide that kind of just works your way through it so you can see it and refresh your memory from time to time. So that's the resource we have for you. So from a next steps perspective, you've already touched base with Steve, I believe.
Yes.
He's your team leader. You can glance through the relevant sections of the group coach guide. I will send you an email after this call with a link to the guide so that you can just grab it and save the link if you like, print it if you need it. We have videos on our YouTube site. If you're interested in those, we have quite a few videos on our Barnabas YouTube site. I don't know, have you ever been there?
I think I watched, like, in the facilitation, there were videos on each of the 4 sections. So that might be the only time I've had exposure to that.
Okay. So in my email, then I'll send you a link to both the YouTube site and the group coach guide. So you'll have them for reference. And then pray for guidance for your calls with the other person you're going to be coaching. And that's kind of how we do it. Questions?
I think it's helpful that I've had a coach. So then when you're telling me all this, I kind of have a good frame of reference to fit what you're saying into. So I think having been on the receiving end, it makes it good to get this training, but I kind of have a vision for what it looks like that, what I'm already participating in.
Right. Well, one question before we go then for you, just to think about as you think about the role of a group coach. So if you had a conversation 1 month via text with your facilitator, would that count as group coaching content?
It wouldn't for me personally, because it's kind of like one-way communication at a time. To me, that's missing out on a whole lot of benefits of an actual conversation. I mean, I think it can be fine to be over the phone, versus in person, but I don't think texting is going to really at all be effective for coaching.
Right. I hear you. I asked the question because in some circumstances, that may be the only way to get a hold of a facilitator during that month.
Okay.
So a little bit of back and forth from in text might be your only option. And so it's funny that I asked the question, it's kind of a trick question. I said, would it count? So are we counting? Is it mandatory that you contact somebody once a month? What happens if you don't? What if it's only a text? So I ask all that because the purpose of coaching is really just connection. It's building a relationship. It's listening and supporting. And sometimes that relationship the communication method might be something different. Overseas, we use a lot of WhatsApp.
Okay.
And a lot of texting, and it might be an audio file. They may just record, 2 minutes of audio and then send that to somebody. The method of communication may vary. The goal is connection. So you decide what you feel is enough connection based on the relationship you have with the individual. And there is no count whether it counts or not. It's really just to maintain. If you feel the relationship is being maintained, wonderful. You're there. You have arrived. You're demonstrating good coaching.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, that concludes.
Thanks for watching. Please click the like button or leave a comment to let us know you enjoyed the video. I also invite you to subscribe to our channel today. Be sure to click the bell icon if you would like to be notified when new content is added.